Hey, this is Todd, and I'm talking about the new adventure slash, I guess, campaign book, Waterdeep Dragon Heist. Uh, Probably a little bit late to this as far as the hot takes go, but I got it a week and a half ago. I just finished reading through it, and I wanted to give my thoughts. So just to preface this, I'm going to be doing some spoilers. I'm certainly going to be looking at it from a referee, dungeon master perspective. So if you're going to play through this, or you think you are, you may want to skip this. I'm not going to go super deep into spoiling particular details, but I am going to talk about the structure a little bit and some of the things that it does. So if you want to be totally spoiler free, probably want to skip this. Let me just get, I guess, the biggest thing out of the way. Perhaps the biggest spoiler. It's called Dragon Heist. Not really a heist in it at all, right? I think you can, if you're going to technically say, yes, this is a heist. But I guess when people think of heist, and I've seen people ask on Reddit and talking about Reddit, thinking, oh, this is going to be sort of an Ocean's 11, kind of robbery sort of structure. It's not like that. Technically, is there a heist going on? Yeah, I suppose there is. But if I was going to be more accurate about what this adventure is like as a whole, what are you really doing? It's really an urban investigation adventure or campaign. That's really what you're doing. I think whether you're planning to run it or whether you're looking at it to get ideas for your own campaign, I think you want to look at it as in here is sort of, how wizards and their crew, what they kind of envision running sort of an urban game. This is kind of it. I think one of the interesting things to look at modules, and you can look at, something like Curse of Strahd is sort of, if you wanted to run, a horror type campaign, what that might look like, and what maybe how Wizards envisions it looking like. If you want to take, Tomb of Annihilation as sort of their ideas on how they would run a hex crawl, then I think you can look at, Dragon Heist as here is their guidance, the way they would lay things out if they were going to run an urban adventure. And as an urban adventure, I think it's pretty well laid out. Again, I'm just coming at it from reading through the rules. I haven't played it. I haven't run it myself. I'm sure there are tons of things that, if I were running it, would either come advantages that I'm maybe not seeing right now, or would be things that I might find obstacles to play, that might be things that I'd realize that I have to work around or prepare more or less. And I don't have any of that guidance. This is simply from reading. What the game tries to do, and at least on a reading level, I feel like it succeeds, is kind of laying out sort of a map, a personality map of Waterdeep. So you have lots of factions. You have lots of, NPCs that they kind of stat out for you. They even give you some great variability with the seasons, where you can start in different seasons, and that will kind of open certain things up. It's very flexible as to who the ultimate villain is. And, they even tell you straight up, hey, you can change this at different times. If maybe you're working towards one villain and the party goes another way and it makes more sense, switch it up. Everything's kind of built in this modular sort of fashion so that you can really craft it. And I think there are definitely segments of the book where they encourage you straight out to, hey, take this stuff and make it yours. If you see things need to be altered, go ahead and alter them. If things need to come in different orders, if you need to switch bad guys, go ahead, and do that. And so the pacing, at least as it's written, as it's laid out, of the adventure is really, starting you out, giving you sort of that opening quest that you go through. And if the party accomplishes that quest, which we assume that they will, they're sort of given a piece of property in town. And then from that becomes sort of their home base, which then also puts them on the radar for different factions who can come into play. And then after some indeterminate amount of time, I think it's left pretty flexible as to how you want to run it. Event that pulls the players into the larger story of this horde of dragons, basically a giant treasure that everyone's, chasing after and hunting. And so as a structure, it kind of lays out some of the things that, I like to do, or I found helpful to myself in the past. Whereas if you're starting a party, even if it's going to be in sort of sandbox, to give them sort of a first adventure that is a little bit structured, that gives them sort of the lay of the land and kind of lays out things and helps, I think, give players a sense of purpose and a sense of things to do before you sort of open them up into the wider world of like, hey, now you're in Waterdeep. What do you do? They could have started it out with one of the players inherits a house from their parents and their grandparents or some long lost cousin. It's in Waterdeep, and then put you down there. But then you have no roots. You have nobody to talk to. You're kind of then just left fumbling for, why am I here? By working in that sort of first adventure, it kind of starts laying the intrigue. it introduces you to different NPCs, and then you sort of have reasons to maybe at least have your ear to the ground as far as what's happening, in the city around you. And it kind of just grounds you, I guess, in Waterdeep, which you may be already. There may be a lot of groups who are playing in Forgotten Realms, and they're already heavily going back and forth in the Waterdeep, and they could probably, in that case, you could probably use a totally different intro to get you into the mix. Maybe you already have property there. Maybe they've already bought homes or houses or things. But I find a lot of times, unless players are super invested, they tend not to buy residences and things. But that's just my own experience. And then it's given a lot of basically after that moment, and then hopefully the players, they have this property, and that kind of puts them on everyone's radar, and then something happens to pull them even further. And again, there's plenty of NPCs that represent these different factions that can also try to pull the party in, maybe using existing contacts if you're playing with characters that are already established, or if they're new characters, they could maybe come with some of these factions as sort of connections already, kind of pull into the web in which they're doing things. And then they sort of have you kind of all these different things can happen. And the book goes through kind of lengths to say that, hey, these villains not really trying to murder, a lot of them could murder you. I think they say that at the end that maybe player characters should be 5th level. Yeah. Adventure for, 1 through 5. So the villains are much more powerful than the PCs. And and the book will go to lengths and say, hey, they're not trying to kill you. A lot of them are trying to stay on the down low. And even if they are apt to violence, and maybe these other factions will come in to sort of balance it out. So they're really trying to encourage situations where you're trying to use your skills, you're trying to use your smarts, your brains, you're trying to, work on the fly of, okay, this guy's pissed us off. Maybe we can do something for him, or maybe we can go, now we have to go maybe get protection from this other faction. They really want to get you into sort of this underground politics of Waterdeep, which is, great. I think it's the kind of stuff that, is important for urban adventures. And I think they really kind of throw it out there and make it sort of, center stage. And then what they do is once you've sort of got all this stuff and you've unraveled it and you've gotten this sort of final piece to the puzzle, there's sort of a set of encounters you run that leads you sort of to the finish line. So if you can think about it, if the adventure kind of starts off and it sort of funnels you in, opens you to this big thing, and then sort of funnels you out the other side. And again, it's flexible. They give you, depending on who your villain is, depending on what's happened, you can sort of run through a bunch of these encounters that sort of line up for each one of those villains. And they also make very clear, hey, if you need to mix them up, if you want to mix them up, if something works better for you another way or this way, then, feel free to do that. But here's our suggested order, essentially. But, take it as you will, which again is nice, and flexible for a GM who doesn't feel like they have to, I think sometimes people get stuck and they have this book and they feel like they need to run through the book exactly as the book has it. Well, here the book is making clear, listen, take this stuff and run it how it makes, sense to you. This adventure is not a lot about going through huge dungeons and doing that. There are a lot of smaller locations, and they give you some nice, simple but effective maps covering these different locations. But a lot of it is just different places and sort of what elements are happening at these places. And then to the finish line where, again, the party's confronted with things which, if they just try to take a violent path, is probably going to end poorly. So it puts the onus on them to come up with creative solutions. And also on the, as the referee, as a GM, you have to be open to these different creative solutions, because the other way is probably going to be a tough road for them. Potentially, I don't want to say impossible, but given that they're going to be level 4, level 5, and, the things that are there at the end are probably overpowering to them if they just, butt heads against it, you need to be open to running those. Now, I just did a video on skills, and, it's interesting because some of the things they do at the end are going to come down to skill rolls. And, if the players do things, maybe not make the best decisions, and then the rolls go against them, it can make things sort of harder for them. They can get a lot of, hey, if you do this, you're going to be disadvantaged on that for a while, or for basically this encounter, which is the end. I would suggest talking about that skills video, being kind of generous. They've come up with something creative that kind of fits everything. Maybe be generous. Obviously you don't want to just give rolls away, and this is the pinnacle. This is the climax of the whole thing. So you don't want to just hand wave a roll away just to give it to them. At the same time, you don't need to grind them into the dirt on just some roles, because really what you want it to be about is about sort of, them working their way through the situation, not their, skill roll. If there's maybe an issue with that last encounter, I would say that they give you kind of several theoretical avenues that you could take. Again, they're not trying to say these are the only avenues you could take, but of those avenues, you have to make fairly decent rolls, and depending on how those rolls go, it could just make everything a lot harder. So I would say either being generous or, definitely look at how your players, particularly depending on how their skills roll out, either encourage them, see how they can get as many advantages on their side as possible. Because once you make those rolls can have a pretty large effect on what happens afterwards. You want to put them in the best spot, not to gift them something that they don't deserve through their play, but you want to make sure that they're lining up everything they can in their corner. And there are definitely ways to do that. And I think the book does a pretty good job, again, just from reading it, does a pretty good job of trying to highlight different things you could do. Hey, if this NPC is out there, then they will sort of, this might be an option for the players, or maybe even that NPC can pop up and do this. If they're with this faction, this is how this faction can help them when they get into this problem. There's a lot of material there. And I think beyond just running the adventure, which seems to be kind of fun if your party's going to take to it, because there's going to be combat and there's going to be things, but the emphasis is really on the wheeling and dealing and maneuvering, and again, the investigation parts and a lot of the social elements, which for some parties are going to be probably a breath of fresh air, and they're just going to, take to it like fish to water. But for some other parties, they're used to just getting in there, rolling initiative and slogging it out, might be a little bit of a harder sell, or just when they get into it, it might be more difficult to lift them out of that mindset of you can't just fight everything, right? Because there's a bunch of factions. There's a city of Waterdeep, which is also a faction, very much a law and order kind of place. You can't just go around, murdering people in the street and, and then think you're just going to walk away from it. And the book will talk about different moments when, the watch will show up and having to deal with them and, potentially getting arrested and things like that. So this is not a place where you can kind of play it like ye old fantasy village where roll in, murder half the town, and, just go sit in the tavern and prop your feet up and nobody comes looking for you. There's a lot at stake, a lot of players, and the party has to be cognizant of that. And then you as the dungeon master, as the referee, have to make sure that they're cognizant, that they get those cues, that be on your toes. Don't just indiscriminately think you can just go, intimidate, murder, do the old murder hoboing thing without a price to pay. So given all of that, I think, I don't think I really have too much negative to say about it just from reading. I think the biggest thing that people are going to be maybe disappointed is when they buy it thinking this is going to be an Ocean's 11 type heist, and there really isn't one. I think you could probably add something in, and there are probably elements that you could maybe think of as a heist, but I think if you're looking for the classic cinematic steps of, again, if you watch an Ocean's 11 type movie, what going through a heist is and the planning and all these different things, it doesn't have that by the book. This is, if I was going to think of a cinematic sort of story kind of thing, it really is an investigation. It's a mystery. Depending on how they play it, it could be more, it's a mad world where there's just crazy, chase across Waterdeep, or it could be more like a film noir type movie. Could be more kind of Maltese Falcon-ish, with the sort of usual suspects cast of characters and the players, utilizing threats of force and recriminations, but really are all about maneuvering around, trying to get the information. Who do you trust? Can you trust anybody, right? Who are the ones who are trustworthy? Who's lying to you? Who's deceiving you, right? There's a lot of that can be a lot of fun. It can also not be what some players are going to find fun. It can also be frustrating. So I think you have to, be careful with that. But that's the kind of game that it is. And I think it's a little unfortunate that the name comes across as sort of a different genre than I feel like it really is. And that can be a disappointment if if your party or your table has looked at it on the cover and seen it in the store and been kind of psyched up, like, yeah, we're going to play heist, and you buy it thinking, oh, it's going to be a heist, and you read through it and you're thinking, where's the heist? It's not really there. Can you take this and build some kind of heist element into it? I think you certainly can. There are probably some things that you can take and goose up and say, I'm going to make this more integral with, again, if you think of kind of heist elements, scoping out a location, a lot of intricate plans, maybe some specialized equipment and technology or, gear, getting some locals on board, either co-opting them without their knowledge or bribing and things like that. And of course, with all that comes sort of double crosses and things you do wrong, and then the complications that ensue, during the actual pulling off of the heist, and then whatever, twist comes. I think you can kind of do something like that. I think those are really hard just in general to pull off as a game, because as much as a referee, I may want the party to pull off an Ocean's 11 type heist. The party really has to want to do it. I can't make them plan. I can't make them case the building. I can't make them go and, find NPCs and try to bribe them or get them on their team. If they do all that stuff, then from that, I can create complications and mistaken identities, or where their map is wrong, or things that get changed, or schedules that go off. You can build the complications part of it, but you can't make them. You can take them to water. You can put all this stuff available to them, but at the end of the day, you have to wait for the party to take that and want to do that. And maybe that's why they didn't put it in here to begin with, because the only way to really mandate that the party would pull off sort of classic cinematic heist would be to kind of force them through the steps. And, that's not a very organic way to do it. And I could see it fraught with difficulty, as, some parties, I'm sure, would just go forward headlong into it and be really engaged with that and kind of pick up on the idea and run with it. But I could see a lot of other parties where you're just sort of dragging them forward, dragging them. And that's not fun, for anybody. So ultimately, I don't know why they went with heist in the name, but it's not really not really a campaign about having a heist. But that's probably the biggest criticism I have just from reading it. Otherwise, I think it is good. I think it has, value. Even if you're running your own homebrew stuff, I think it's always interesting, to see, again, how they envision running certain things in the system. And so I think you can look at this, and it gives you a good layout of, how if you were going to build Waterdeep or a similar large city, cosmopolitan city, as your main, adventure hub, how do you run it? What kind of things do you want to put in it? What kind of forces do you want arrayed, against each other, put into conflict? And then ways of taking that conflict and then using it to drive an adventure for your party. And Dragon Heist certainly does that. And it's a nice book. They're all nice. I don't know if there's a special edition for this. I think there is. I didn't get it. I find that my attraction to special editions is kind of faded, because ultimately for me, they're working books or reading books, and I don't keep them in a spot where I'm really looking at the covers over much. That's Dragon Heist. I'm sure I'm, the last person to talk about it. I'm sure everyone's kind of read through it, but I figured I would give my 2 cents just to, summarize. Again, I think it's a great book if you're looking to see how Wizards would want you to run sort of an urban adventure. Caveat, there's no real heist in it, but there's a lot of other good material, and I think it lays out, how to put sort of webs of power and intrigue in an urban setting, and does that very well. So I think it's probably worth reading, regardless of whether you actually want to run it or not. But certainly, if you're going to be doing stuff in Waterdeep, I think there's a lot of information that probably is, really handy, even if you're not going to actually use the sort of Dragon Heist incident to drive your actual campaign. If you enjoy videos like these, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. It helps me out a lot. I also have a Patreon if you'd like to support the show in a different way. Thanks for watching.